The man groaned as he struggled to rise, rain matting his hair, and his sandwich ruined at his feet. Claire rushed over, kneeling beside him. "Are you hurt?" she asked, gently touching his arm. "Just bruised and hungry," he chuckled weakly. Minutes later, she returned with a warm sandwich and a bottle of water. "You didn't have to." "I know," she whispered, "but I've been the one lying on the ground before." Hours later, she entered the interview room, resume trembling in her hand. And there he was. He was the CEO, the same man she had helped, soaked, and forgotten on the street. She didn't know who he was then. She just cared. Now he held the power to decide her future. Claire Bennett clutched her worn leather bag tighter as she stood in line at the small corner deli. The rain outside hadn't let up all morning, soaking the sidewalks and adding an extra chill to the already gray New York day. Inside her pocket, she had exactly $4. 16, barely enough for a small coffee and a bagel. But that was fine. Today wasn't about food, it was about hope. She was headed to an interview. Not just any interview. The interview. A marketing assistant role at Whitmore & Co., a prestigious firm she dreamt of joining since graduating. If she got this job, it would mean stability, health insurance, maybe even enough to help her mom cover rent. She'd stayed up all night rehearsing answers, printing out her resume, and ironing her only decent blazer. She was ready, focused, determined, but fate, as it often does, had other plans. Just as she stepped out of the deli with her bagel and coffee in hand, she saw him, a man stumbling on the slick pavement. He slipped, landing hard on one knee. The brown paper bag in his hands tore, spilling a soggy sandwich onto the ground. Claire's instinct kicked in. She ran to him. "Sir, are you all right?" she asked, kneeling beside him, despite the pouring rain. His shirt clung to him, soaked through, his hair matted across a lined forehead. He looked up at her, dazed but not angry. "Just bruised. And hungry," he chuckled weakly. Her heart ached at the sight. He didn't look like someone used to falling. There was a weight about him, something heavy in the eyes, something more than a bad day. Maybe he'd lost something, or someone, maybe everything. She didn't hesitate. She stood up, turned back into the deli, and returned minutes later with a warm sandwich and a bottled water. Her coffee would have to wait, so would her nerves about the interview. "You didn't have to," the man began. "I know," Claire said softly, placing the sandwich into his hands. "But I've been the one lying on the ground before." They shared a quiet moment beneath the storm. Two strangers who understood that sometimes the smallest gestures could be lifelines. He nodded, grateful but distant, like someone not used to being cared for. Claire smiled once more, then checked the time. She was going to be late. Still, she turned and ran toward the subway, rainwater splashing at her ankles, heart oddly full. What she didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that the man she had just helped wasn't homeless or jobless. He was Graham Whitmore, the CEO of Whitmore & Co. And in less than an hour, he'd be sitting across from her in a high-rise office, with every right to decide her future, and a very different perspective on who she really was. The lobby of Veil Corp gleamed like a shrine to power. Polished marble floors, minimalist design, and receptionists who looked like they stepped off fashion runways. Claire Bennett sat upright in a modern leather chair, her resume clutched tightly between fingers that trembled just enough to betray her nerves. She had changed into dry clothes, applied a touch of lipstick in the elevator mirror, and practiced her elevator pitch 3 times before entering the 24th floor. But now her stomach twisted with more than just nerves. She couldn't shake the memory of the man in the rain, his soaked shirt, his quiet eyes. She hoped he was all right. Claire's name was called. She stood, exhaled, and walked toward the glass-paneled interview room, determined to prove herself. The interview began smoothly. The panel, 3 sharply dressed executives, smiled politely as Claire walked them through her resume. She explained her work volunteering with a coding literacy program in the Bronx. She detailed her freelance marketing experience. When they asked about strategy, she answered with clarity. When they asked about adaptability, she smiled and said, "I've had to start over before." But then came the inevitable question. "We ran a background check, Miss Bennett," one of them said gently, her voice like velvet over a blade. "Could you explain the conviction?" Claire's throat tightened, but she'd prepared for this. "Yes," she said. 3 years ago, I was charged with financial fraud. I was working under someone I trusted, my partner at the time. I didn't realize until it was too late that he was manipulating both me and the accounts. When the investigation began, he disappeared. I took a plea deal. I served time. There was a pause, not judgment, but discomfort. She continued, voice steady. I won't make excuses, but I've spent every day since rebuilding. I completed a tech certification while incarcerated. I've taught kids to code. I've worked hard, stayed clean, and all I want is a chance to contribute, to build something honest. There was silence. The panel scribbled notes. One member shifted uncomfortably. The woman who had asked the question gave a tight-lipped nod and said, "Thank you for your honesty." What Claire didn't know was that behind the tinted glass of an adjacent office, Graham Whitmore stood watching. He recognized her the moment she stepped in, the girl in the rain, the one who had given him a sandwich and a little bit of hope when the world felt too loud. But now he saw another side, a woman who'd faced judgment, not just weather. He saw how her hands clenched in her lap, how she met every question with unflinching sincerity. No victimhood, no lies, just truth. And Graham, who'd spent years pretending he wasn't broken himself, felt something shift. This wasn't just another applicant. She wasn't here to impress. She was here to redeem. And maybe, just maybe, she wasn't the only one who needed that. The boardroom on the 25th floor of Veil Corp was colder than usual that morning, not in temperature, but in tone. Laura Kim from HR sat at the end of the polished table, eyes fixed on the manila folder marked Claire Bennett. Next to her, Victor Langston, the firm's senior legal counsel, flipped through the same file, his jaw set, fingers tapping restlessly. "She's impressive," Laura admitted, breaking the silence. "Great technical skills, excellent soft skills. She aced the interview." Victor leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "But she's also a convicted felon. Financial fraud. That doesn't exactly inspire confidence for a firm that handles sensitive client data." Laura hesitated. She was honest about it, transparent. She's done the work to move forward. Victor's voice was calm but pointed. "And what happens when a client Googles her name and asks why Veil Corp hires ex-cons?" The room fell silent again. Just then the door opened. Graham Whitmore walked in, not in his usual suit jacket, but shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows. There was no laptop, no notes in hand, just a worn, flattened sandwich wrapper. He walked to the center of the table, placed the wrapper down, and stood silently for a moment. Then he looked up, his eyes meeting each face in the room. "I want to tell you a story," he said quietly. No one interrupted. "3 days ago, I fell on the street. It was raining. My lunch hit the ground. My side hurt, and not a single person stopped." His fingers tapped the wrapper gently. "Except one." He paused. "She didn't ask who I was. She didn't care how I looked. She just knelt down and asked if I was okay. Then she bought me a sandwich, with her last dollar." Laura blinked. Victor shifted in his chair. "She didn't know I was the CEO," Graham added. "She just helped." Another pause. "That woman was Claire Bennett." The room stilled. "She's not asking us for pity. She's not hiding her past. She's standing in front of us asking to be seen for what she's done since, not just what she went through. And I believe that matters." Victor cleared his throat. "With all due respect, Graham, this isn't just about empathy. It's about precedent, policy." Graham stepped closer. "Then maybe it's time we change what our precedent is. Maybe it's time we start building a company that doesn't just reward privilege, but recognizes resilience." Laura looked back down at the file. Her fingers slowly smoothed the edge. "I'm not saying we hire every applicant with a record," Graham continued. "I'm saying we start seeing the whole person." He folded his arms. "Claire Bennett starts Monday." No one argued, because when the CEO speaks, truly speaks, the room listens. The elevator chimed softly as Claire stepped onto the 22nd floor of Veil Corp. New badge clipped to her blazer, heart pounding louder than her heels. The hallway stretched ahead like a runway, every footstep echoing with quiet expectations and silent scrutiny. No applause, no warm welcome, just sidelong glances and whispered guesses. She passed two co-workers at the coffee machine. "Is that her?" one murmured. "That's the girl from, you know." Claire didn't look back. She kept walking. Her desk sat in the far corner, next to a tall window overlooking the city. It was clean, impersonal, a blank canvas. She hung her coat on the back of the chair, sat down and opened her laptop, pretending not to feel the weight of the stairs across the room. Her inbox had 15 unread messages and one calendar invite. No greetings, no mentorship offers, just the unspoken message. "You're lucky to be here. Don't expect more." But someone had done more. Lying in the center of her desk was a leather-bound journal, elegant, soft to the touch. On its cover, embossed in silver, were the words, "From fall to flight." Claire stared at it, confused. She hadn't brought it. Inside the first page was a handwritten note, tucked gently into the crease. "Every comeback begins with one person who keeps walking. Welcome to your flight." No signature. She looked around, but no one met her gaze. The floor buzzed with quiet productivity, no sign of who had left the gift. Still, something about the message made her shoulders settle. She traced the words with her fingertips, closed the journal, and tucked it into her drawer. And she got to work. That week, Claire answered every email with double-checked precision. She submitted her first report a day early. She asked questions, but never too many. She listened more than she spoke. But still the whispers continued. Some called her the charity case. Others labeled her Graham's project. And a few, the silent ones, just watched, waiting for her to prove them right or wrong. Claire didn't react. She didn't explain herself. She simply kept walking. Because that journal wasn't just a gift. It was a challenge. A reminder that comebacks weren't loud. They were quiet, deliberate, persistent. By Friday, someone left a sticky note on her monitor. "Nice job on the analytics model. Didn't expect that." No name, just acknowledgement. It was small, but to Claire, it felt like a turning point. Because the louder journey she was hoping for, the one with applause and redemption and maybe even belonging, wasn't something handed to her. It was something she'd earn, step by step, line by line, day by day, and she would keep walking. The office was silent, the kind of silence only heard after midnight, long after footsteps and small talk had faded, long after even the hum of the espresso machine gave way to darkness and stillness. Claire sat alone under the low glow of her desk lamp, papers scattered like a storm across her workspace. Her laptop's fan whirred faintly as a spreadsheet blinked back at her. She rubbed her eyes, then blinked down at her half-written presentation, her first cross-department project. It had to be perfect. She knew that eyes were still watching her, measuring her not by her work but by her past. So she stayed, long after everyone had gone, again. Across the building, Graham Whitmore returned to his office after a dinner with investors. He had forgotten his tablet, but when he stepped into the quiet corridor, something unexpected caught his eye. A single soft light still shining in the sea of darkness. He walked slowly toward it, curious. And there she was. Claire was curled slightly in her office chair, head resting on her folded arms atop a report, breath soft and slow. Her shoulders rose and fell with exhaustion, her hair a little messy, a pen still clutched loosely in her hand. He didn't speak, didn't wake her. He simply stood there, watching for a moment that felt strangely still. Then, without a word, he took off his navy jacket and gently draped it over her. The fabric brushed her arm, but she didn't stir. He left, but returned minutes later with a paper cup, chamomile tea from the break room. He set it beside her quietly, careful not to disturb the fragile peace she had finally found after days of strain. And then he sat across from her, not as a CEO, just as a man. He watched her sleep under the dim light, and something in his chest shifted. It wasn't pity. He'd felt pity before, for strangers, for stories he read in the paper. This was something different. It was respect, admiration, trust. Claire had faced fire and walked through it. She didn't need rescue. She needed space to rise. A few minutes later, Claire stirred. Her eyes fluttered open slowly. Confused, she blinked at the warm tea, then at the jacket wrapped around her shoulders. She sat up quickly, embarrassed. "Oh no, did I? I didn't mean to fall asleep," she said, brushing her hair from her face. Graham lifted a hand gently. "It's all right. You earned the rest." She looked at him, startled. "Mr. Whitmore, Call me Graham," he said softly. Their eyes met in the hush of the empty floor. Something passed between them. Not a declaration, not a spark of romance, but something more fragile and real. Understanding, a moment of grace. Claire sipped the tea, jacket still around her shoulders, as Graham stood. "I'll drive you home," he said. And for once, she didn't refuse help, because maybe trust, real trust, starts in silence, over tea and kindness too quiet for the world to notice. The room fell silent as Claire stepped onto the stage. 1,000 eyes followed her every move, some curious, others skeptical, but many deeply hopeful. The backdrop behind her read, "National Summit on Redemption and Reintegration," and beneath it, "Empowering Second Chances." Claire wasn't used to stages. She had never spoken in front of this many people. But today she didn't need a script. She had her story and her truth. She stood at the podium, microphone quietly humming. In the far back, partially hidden in the shadows, stood Graham Whitmore. Arms crossed, gaze steady, expression unreadable, but present. Always present. Claire took a breath, then another, and began. "There was a time I believed that in order to redeem yourself, you had to be flawless. That to undo a past mistake, or in my case a past label, you had to somehow become perfect." She let her eyes drift across the room. Executives, lawmakers, HR professionals, former inmates, and nonprofit leaders all watched. "But that's not true," she said, voice growing steadier. "Redemption doesn't start with perfection. It starts with one person, one moment, one decision to believe someone's story isn't over." The screen behind her lit up. An image of a rain-drenched sidewalk, a crumpled sandwich wrapper lying in the gutter. Claire turned slightly, gesturing to it. "I didn't have much that day. Just $4.16. I was cold, nervous, on my way to a job interview that could change everything. And then I saw him, a man who had slipped, soaked in rain, lunch ruined, pride shattered." A few heads in the audience tilted, starting to recognize the story from the headlines months ago. No one stopped. Everyone walked past. She paused. "Except me." The crowd leaned in, still. "I gave him a sandwich and a bottle of water. Because I knew what it felt like to lie on the ground and have no one stop for you. I didn't know who he was. I didn't ask." Another slide changed. This time, a photo of Veil Corp's headquarters. That man was the CEO of the company I was about to interview with. Murmurs rippled across the room. And instead of turning me away for a conviction I already paid for, he gave me a desk and a chance. He judged me not by what I had done, but by what I chose to do after. She looked down for a brief moment, then back up again, her voice trembling with something soft and honest. "I didn't have anything that day, just a sandwich. But sometimes that's enough to start again." A single clap broke the silence, then another, and another, until the room was filled with a standing ovation, not just for Claire's words, but for what they represented: hope, humanity, and the audacity to believe in someone's comeback. In the back of the room, Graham didn't move. He didn't need to. Claire wasn't speaking for applause. She was speaking for truth, and he had already heard it in the rain long ago. Claire stepped back from the podium, breath shaking, but shoulders squared. She didn't just survive her past. She had transformed it. And all it took was a sandwich, and someone who saw her not for who she was, but for who she could become. The sun had begun its gentle descent, casting long golden streaks across the park near the summit hall. The air was still, heavy with the kind of quiet that holds moments before they change everything. Claire stood beneath an old oak tree, her heels pressed into soft grass, the applause from her speech still echoing faintly in her chest. She had stepped outside alone, needing a breath, needing space to feel what had just happened. Not just the standing ovation, but the deep, echoing silence that followed her words. A silence full of understanding. She didn't expect to see him there, but Graham was waiting. He stood a few paces away, leaning lightly against the tree trunk, his tie loosened, sleeves rolled up, the familiar crease of thought between his brows. When she saw him, her lips parted in a small breath of surprise. "I thought you'd left," she said softly. "I almost did," he replied, stepping forward. "But then I didn't want to miss the best part." Claire gave a shy smile, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Which part was that?" "The one where you told the world the truth and stood taller because of it," he said, voice warm. "The one where you reminded everyone in that room, including me, that courage doesn't come after you're healed. It's what heals you." She looked at him then, really looked. This man who once sat behind a glass wall, who watched her silently in an interview room, who placed a coat over her sleeping shoulders, who let her rise without needing to be rescued. "You changed my life," she whispered. Graham shook his head gently. "No, you changed mine." A silence settled between them, not awkward, just charged with things unsaid. The kind of silence that stretches between two people who both know what's coming but are afraid to break it too soon. "I've wanted to tell you something," he said finally. Claire's heart tightened. "I didn't say anything before because I didn't want you to think it was gratitude, or admiration, or guilt." She swallowed. "But it's not," he continued, stepping closer. "It's love." He looked straight at her. "I'm in love with you, Claire." Time didn't stop. The wind still rustled the leaves. A bird still called overhead. But in her chest, something softened. A wall she didn't even know she'd built slid quietly away. She didn't speak immediately. Instead, she took a slow step toward him, letting his words wrap around her like the jacket he once left at her desk. "I was hoping you'd say that," she said, voice trembling, not with fear, but joy. "Because me too." He exhaled. A soft, disbelieving laugh escaped him. She smiled wider. It wasn't dramatic. There were no violins, no sudden rainfall like the day they first met. Just the two of them, under a tree, in the quiet light of a closing day. Claire reached for his hand. He took it, and together they began to walk. Not toward a stage or a company lobby or a boardroom, just forward. Two people who once crossed paths in the rain, each carrying their own broken pieces, now walking into something whole. Not because it was easy, but because they had chosen to believe in each other, and in love that begins not with perfection, but with kindness. In today's fast-paced world, where resumes are filtered by algorithms and second chances are rare, Claire and Graham's story reminds us of something timeless: the power of human kindness and the quiet courage it takes to see beyond someone's past. It started with a sandwich, not money, not influence, just a simple act of compassion. And from that, a future was rewritten. Claire didn't need saving. She needed someone to believe in her. And Graham, a man shaped by structure and success, rediscovered what leadership truly means: to lift, not judge. In American culture today, where reputation often outweighs redemption, this story asks, what if we valued resilience as much as we value credentials? What if companies hired not just the polished, but also the proven, those who fought their way back with integrity? And what about us? Would we stop to help someone who had nothing to give back? Could we forgive someone who made a mistake but chose to rise? We invite you to reflect. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever been given a second chance? Do you believe people can truly change? Thank you for watching this story on Warm Soul Stories. If it moved you, if it reminded you of the better parts of humanity, please consider liking, subscribing, and hitting the notification bell so you never miss a story that touches the heart. Because sometimes all it takes is a small act to change a life forever, and sometimes that life could be your own.